So these underlying principles, how do they relate or not relate to power?
I definitely think they do relate, right? Because when it's very much focused on the concept of energy and where you're putting your energy and what you're giving energy, right? What you focus your energy on is what really becomes kind of your thought pattern as it relates to a specific subject. And that thought pattern quickly manifests in the real world. Whether we like it or not, it kind of is what it is. So there's a pretty substantial connection, I guess, between energy and power and where you're throwing your energy and how you're choosing to see things in the moment or even shift things in the moment has a lot to do with how powerful you feel.
This is The Growth Moment with your coach, Amy Kay. Inspiration, ideas, and incredible insights for you to be more and do more. Get ready to grow today. It's all about power today. The very nature of power. The principles or underlying components. This is an opportunity for you to consider where you get your power and how you choose to use it. My guest is Kristi, an executive leader and committed grower. Kristi is one of those deep thinkers. She is a voracious learner, sucking in tools, philosophies, and paradigms, free-ranging between strategy and tactics. This episode is a combo of coaching and just a cool conversation. My happy place. We explore all kinds of power from parenting to professional with the goal of better leveraging Kristi's energy and hence impact and momentum in the world. I want you to think about the principles of your power. Where do you feel powerful versus powerless? What is your source of power? Do you think it comes from inside or out? As you begin to explore, ponder where you most need a power shift to create impact and momentum. I hope you walk away today with some fresh insights and ideas about you and power. Okay, let's jump in from the beginning after I ask Kristi, what is this power thing for you?
In so many ways, it's just a theme that has come up in multiple different places, and it has different names depending on where I'm playing. But it's essentially this idea that what you want is there. It's just, are you going to get out of your own way and really embrace it, or let kind of the world around you define it?
So is the seat of power or the source of power in who defines something, who states what reality is? How would you put it?
It is a little, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a piece of like defining your reality too, right? Like, there's all these like kitschy sayings like it can make you better, it can make you bitter, and you kind of choose. It's like the same idea, but on a less Pollyanna scale, if you will.
What are a couple of, if you want to share, any potent examples of a power shift or a power dynamic or a power transformation that has come about in your life?
I think there's a few. I mean, I would say autism is a really great place to start because, with Porter, when he was diagnosed, there was this idea of what having an autistic child meant, which was very much defined by stereotypes in my world because there was a lot I didn't know, despite having worked with kids for a really long time back in the day. It was one of those things that could have easily been looked at in a way that is, very like defeating. That there were a lot of people at the time who were like, oh, he's 3 years old. This is a race against the clock. You have to get all these services in before he hits a certain age, or he's not going to.
Wow, race against the clock. Yeah, no
Yes.
pressure there.
No, not at all. With your 3-year-old, right? And even my brain to some extent, like, I like stats and I like statistics. And I remember, diving really deep in the internet and trying to figure out, like, based on what he was able to do, like, what are the chances he's ever going to be able to talk? Like, just different things like that, that again could be really defeating if you weren't careful. And what was so interesting about the autism diagnosis, and in some ways, what saved me in terms of perspective, is I remember when Porter was born, he was about a year old. One of my absolute favorite teachers, we'll call him, had put up this series called Launching Rockets. And it was really more about the energy that you bring to parenting and how easy it is to be, anxious all the time because you're worried about your kid, not like
Stakes are so high.
the stakes are really high, and you're worried about them not being successful later in life. And so you approach a lot of things with this, like, really kind of deep anxiety, and your kid picks up on that. And, some of the best things you can do for your kid is make sure that they know that they are very much enjoyed. Because if you're enjoying them and they're enjoying you, you have so much more influence kind of in the long haul. He also had this really great, take on what he called door number two. And he's like, don't become a door number two parent, where you make the one thing that you're afraid of your kid getting a hold of, like such a bad thing and such an elusive thing, like in your house, that you give it more energy than it deserves. It's like your kids,
They pick up on it.
yeah, your kids know what you think about that subject. So why does it have to be like, why do you have to center all of your parenting on it? So it's really interesting, and it was oddly timed because it felt like it was much more for, someone who had 13-year-olds or 15-year-olds or something to that effect. But I just remember kind of absorbing everything, but really thinking hard about it. There were some things in there that changed what I did with Porter at that time. Like, instead of saying no all the time, he had this, great take on, like, when you constantly like tell your kid like no, or you're constantly kind of not necessarily shaming them, but asking like, why do you always do that? XYZ, you're ascribing things to their identity. He's like, it's so much more powerful and impactful, at least the way I do it in my house, is to say, we don't do that. Like, we don't play like that. That's not part of who we are as a collective. And so it really changed the way I even engaged with my toddler. Like, I didn't say no a lot. I was like, oh, we don't do that, buddy. Like, just even like subtle energy shifts, and how I was talking to a kid who arguably could not understand, but it really ended up being a lifesaver.
So again, the energy of it isn't you diving in between him and the thing that he shouldn't be doing,
Right.
literally or figuratively.
Fair enough.
But instead, it's like this relaxed of like, oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
we don't do that, but we are doing this. I mean, there's such a, well, let me ask you a question. So these underlying principles, how do they relate or not relate to power?
I definitely think they do relate, right? Because when it's very much focused on the concept of energy and where you're putting your energy and what you're giving energy, right? What you focus your energy on is what really becomes kind of your thought pattern as it relates to a specific subject. And that thought pattern quickly manifests in the real world. Whether we like it or not, it kind of is what it is. So there's a pretty substantial connection, I guess, between energy and power, and where you're throwing your energy and how you're choosing to see things in the moment, or even shift things in the moment, has a lot to do with how powerful you feel in tackling certain things.
I know my 17-year-old would have a lot to say, like he would immediately tie this back to jujitsu and martial arts about energy and power. And very much when you feel like in one moment you are, being defeated, and then you make one shift of your focus, of where your energy is going, and all of a sudden you flipped it. So this is really intriguing to me because, of course, I'm all about the power of your perspective, your thought, your words, the what if being, all the bad stuff, what ifing, versus the positive what ifing. What if? What if this? What if that? And it's that much of a pivot point. So here's a question for you. How does this relate to professional power as well, not just parenting power? I told you this is a philosophical kind of episode. For Kristi, power is all about energy and perspective. How you choose to see and shift things in the moment is what creates a powerful feeling. This is always a potential pivot point with clients. Remembering you are at choice. You choose what you think, where you focus, how you define a situation. Truly, choice is the ultimate power source. It's an inside job, not outside. The idea that your thoughts and focus help create your reality is not news. But how will you leverage that knowledge? Have you identified an area yet where you need a power shift. Where have you been letting others define your power? I invite you to start considering a few actions or a change in perspective to help you leverage your power and create the impact and momentum you most want. We pick up with Kristi right after I ask her how these principles relate to professional power, not just parenting.
It's interesting. I think that there is a tendency to define what we want from our careers, right? In our professional life. But a lot of times, I think we take for granted not just how we're going to get there, but what it's going to feel like along the way. And I feel like that there's a huge component here with this conversation about energy and power professionally of, okay, as I'm climbing that ladder, like, what do I want it to feel like? What's the, not just the energy I want to bring to it, but like, what do I want this to feel like, frankly, in my body as I'm like navigating all of these things? Do I want to be
What do
like,
you want it to experience in your leadership? How do you want it to feel, be?
yeah, yes, exactly. Do you want ease? Do you want jealousy? Do you need it to feel like it's hard and difficult and that you climbed that ladder and got there like through grit,
And power overing people.
power overing people, like kind of what's the end game? And I think that's as I'm thinking about it, I'm kind of having an aha. It's such an important question to ask because it's not what we're taught to ask. And especially as it relates to career, you end up getting, so many examples of people who've worked so hard to get there. And if you really value hard work, you're going to naturally like kind of grip and put that grit into things and think that it needs to be difficult to get there. But that's going to come out in kind of how you relate to people. So when it comes to leadership and kind of next leveling, you almost have to take a step back and say, okay, yeah, I've done all these cool things and it was hard work to get here and I'm proud of that. But maybe the next step is lighter. Maybe it requires me being really mindful of the energy I'm bringing to my team or this assignment or this role, kind of whatever it looks like, and making sure it feels good from start to finish.
Kristi, those pieces you said about the parenting guru, don't be a door number 2 boss. Could you apply a few of those core tenets in corporate leadership?
Absolutely. There's a lot of opportunity there, right? Like we're in the current, my current business environment, we're a startup. We all come from different businesses. I used to tell this like joke in an interview that I was like, I can literally look up from my desk and every corner of the room, I can name a different company where everyone came from.
Wow.
One of the cool things about that is it means you have really deep talent in the building, and that's awesome. But one of the other things about that is you have people, be it consciously or subconsciously, trying to rebuild the cultures that they came from, which are all vastly different.
Wildly diverse, I imagine.
Absolutely. And so there's this tendency to kind of like fight for your territory and fight for your role and fight for who's doing what.
And look over your shoulder. Who's doing what?
Look over your shoulder. But there's also the opportunity to like think about it differently from an energy standpoint. Like, oh, if we all do come from these really great companies with these really great points of view, what can we learn from the way that team wants to do something that maybe we haven't thought about before? Like, what can we pick up to sort of catapult us forward, versus using the differences to sort of create roadblocks along the way.
And to create separation.
Exactly.
Instead of collaboration and amplification. You always say about Porter that piece on even with or without the neurodivergent diagnosis, you always strove to recognize him in his full humanness, his full Porterness of like, that's what has mattered, of you want to create space for him to be Porter. How does that relate again to the culture, maybe the next level of culture that you're capable of building in a company?
I think there's this tendency with people, with teams, cross-functionally, and in like your own team, we sort of already have in our minds, right, the role that people occupy by virtue of their job description or by virtue of, just how corporate works. And it is really interesting. I'm pausing because I'm thinking about it right now.
Yeah, it has implications.
Yeah, to sort of think about, the person first and the talents they bring to the table and what makes them happy, and really pulling those things out of them with or without the job description to an
Like
extent.
even for a moment to say, just like with Porter, okay, you're not just a kid in a classroom. You're not just this who's supposed to be doing these things in a certain way.
Right.
You threw out the rule book and said, oh, but what if it's this? What if it's that with your child? What does that level of Kristiness look like if you really let loose your deepest instincts?
I think it removes a lot of ego from the equation, right?
How so?
Well, if you're really focused on an environment where everyone gets to play to their strengths, which theoretically, I think we've moved to a place in business where most people want that.
We say we want that. Yeah.
We say we want that, but maybe we don't understand it. But if you're moving toward an environment where everyone gets to play to their strengths, there's plenty of strengths to go around.
Mm-hmm.
You also kind of get to tell people just really point blank, like if it's not feeling good for you and the energy isn't right, we need to make some tweaks. Like what does that look like? Is it a resource? Is it a resourcing issue? Is it a role issue? Is it a moment issue? Like,
Is
is it
it
a
a
fit
fit
issue?
issue?
And it kind of opens up the doors to have better and bigger conversations because you're not trying to silo someone back to a role.
How does that become something that drives productivity, efficiency, innovation, and the bottom, all the bottom lines that need to be met, as opposed to just being like, oh, it's a great culture. We all get to be who we are, but we don't really, we're not successful.
Yeah, we have to move toward our North Star. Well, I think that there's an element of, right people, right seats. But if you are the right people and it's the right role, you're going to feel good doing it, right? Like some people, for example, are just innately learners and they need to be in a place where they're kind of like pushing against their edge so that they can learn new things and they're happy learning new things. And there are other people who are
They want to do the thing they already know really well.
glorious. I call
Yes.
them glorious box checkers.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're happy to wake up every morning, open that spreadsheet, go down the list, check off all the dots, and like just make sure things are running. I will never be that person. So I need those people. So I think it's really like learning to play to strengths to the benefit of the whole.
And so for you personally, I mean, you are one of the best consumers of vast amounts of information, learning, TikTok videos of all kinds, philosophy, just you name it, you can suck it in like nobody's business. But if you were to take all of this and go beyond at leadership where you've gone so far, what does that look like? I always love when a client gets to apply their strengths and skills in one life area over to another. Kristi is incredibly powerful as a parent. Her son's autism diagnosis most likely made that power up a necessity. So we got to play with using those same principles for her leadership in the business world. Kristi champions the importance of focusing on the experience we want to have in the job, not just the title or job description. Again, the energy and perspective approach. Creating space for the full person in the job, for it all to feel right and good. It goes for her family and her team. That's the kind of home, company, and world I want to live in. How about you? What powerful ideas and concepts are coming into focus? What have you realized so far about your own principles of power? Is there a situation or person that is begging for a power shift? I want you to truly believe that you are at choice in this moment. How can you use that power today? We get into the last chunk with Kristi. I just asked what her next level of leadership looks like now.
First word that comes to mind is increased transparency, actually. And not necessarily so much from an information standpoint, but from a like letting people into the kitchen standpoint, almost figuring out together, because that's one of the beauties of a startup, how we're going to do this thing and how we're really going to drive impact. And this is such a good conversation to be having, because I think we're going to do a workshop soon. But like it's almost like letting people into the kitchen versus needing to be able to direct people.
So how do you, I don't even know what the right question is, but something about maintain authority with such transparency, such collaboration? How can you masterfully maintain your leadership and authority with that much, not decentralization, but that much sharing of power?
You know what's funny, and I'm going to have to test it, not to keep going back to my son, but with Porter, there's a lot of decentralization of power in our house because, we know that he has some demand avoidance issues and that too many demands create anxiety. So we pick our battles very strategically. And we really only have to push when we push. But what's interesting is he has a massive amount of respect when we do say, okay, nobody, like, no, this is the way it's got to be. It's not fun. But this time we're going to have to, like, be a little bit more forceful about it or kind of insist. And it, like, the power dynamic really isn't an issue because the trust and the respect is there. And it's almost as if he knows, okay, if they're doubling down, it must be really important.
So think about that in the workplace of how you create that much trust and respect with your direct reports, with your peers, with your boss and bosses and board, all of it. That much trust and respect so that when Kristi does say, okay, it has that weight, that strength.
I think there's probably a curiosity component, right? Like being really good at having the conversations and spending the time to get to, not just to get to know people, but like for them to see you kind of work and understand what you're going for, but also really understand what's driving them, which theoretically I always ask people, like, ultimately, like, what do you want? But there's probably an opportunity to get better at, why are you thinking that way right now? Like what's kind of like driving that?
So think about what you've done with Porter to get the read and take and understanding of him. Now, obviously, you're not going to put in that level with every single person in your life, but where could you move the needle with a deeper dive?
In the immediate, I would say, with my direct reports, making sure I understand kind of what's driving them, but also, frankly, there's a little bit of putting ego aside and like being okay with people saying, "Oh, I don't think that's the best way to like handle this right now," or just hearing people out when they do say those things, if that makes sense.
It does.
And it's not that I like don't necessarily like listen, or I think there's definitely a culture. Anybody who works for me will tell you you're a very approachable person. So I get a lot of information in. I think sometimes the way I internalize certain things, though, I could easily like take a step back and say, okay, you've said that a couple times now. Like, what's driving that? Like, why do you think that way? Because most of the time, the only time it'll like, create any sort of tension is if I see it differently and have like a different point of view. So it's getting really curious about why we're coming at it from two opposite perspectives, I would say.
So feel that if we start to pull this together of, and I didn't do the coaching thing, I didn't really do a bottom line. What do you want out of this session? What is it that we're going for? So what would you say now? Good, we're right in the midst of it. Where is this leading and what do you want to walk away with now?
I kind of want a little bit of a toolkit for how to almost evaluate the energy of any sort of situation, not just parenting, and almost like do a check-in and figure out where I can tweak things. It's easy to solve the problem without taking a step back and say, okay, what's the end goal here? Like, what do we ultimately want? And more importantly, what are we not really willing to sacrifice? And I think that's very true, probably from a home perspective, but it's also a very good professional question. Like, what do I ultimately want? And what am I not willing to sacrifice in this sort of like new world order of bringing everybody into the kitchen, and letting everybody kind of discover who they are in this setting in the best way possible. In the professional world, so many things are just defined for you. And even if it's not your job, handing you a job description and saying, this is what you're doing and this is what it is. There's 1,000 girl boss podcasts and all these kind of ideas of what it's supposed to look like and feel like out there, that you almost don't even have time to take a step back and say, no, this is what I want.
But what's me? What's mine?
What's me? Like, what's my take on this? How do I want to spend my time and my energy and my day? And more importantly, what do I want it to feel like if this is where I'm going to put so much of my time and my energy and my day?
Beautiful. Look at what happens when we have the space to reflect, to recognize, to identify and choose our kind of power. Kristi's power consists of so many principles: transparency, curiosity, collaboration, trust, mutual respect, taking time, understanding, and letting go of ego. For Kristi, it's definitely not authoritarian power. No, because I said so kind of thing. The nature of her power is highly intentional and all about the energy first. As always, there's no one right answer or formula. Power can come from silence and giving someone space. It can come from passion and persuasion. It can come from intelligence and confidence, or humility and compassion. The bottom line, all that matters is your principles of power. What enables you to be at your most powerful, to have that incredible impact and momentum. But this knowledge and mastery comes from reflection. I invite you to be a deep thinker here and now, and definitely to explore and experiment. Jot some ideas down. Notice when you feel powerful and when you don't. Play with what feels authentic and natural to you. Your kind of power doesn't have to look like anyone else's. I hope you share the unfolding of your principles of power with me. Remember that you can have your own growth moment, one-on-one private coaching, or join one of my coaching groups or workshops. To get the scoop, visit thegrowthmoment.com and do subscribe, follow on your favorite podcast app and my YouTube channel. Now get out there and grow today.